All right, welcome to episode 83 of Cannabis Live. Apologies for the sound. As I've tried to mention, but probably nobody's heard me, we are working to incorporate a more sophisticated broadcast, and with that we are testing out for the first time some of our recording equipment. So apologies for the sound issue. We are actively working on it, and we want to make sure that we have the best show for everyone. So if you're still with us, thank you for joining us. Today, me and
Galendez.
Yep, sorry, I skipped through the We are going to be talking about the microbusiness and the Class A grow for the adult use program. We're going to be comparing them to some of the medical marijuana licenses. And we're going to talk about some of the strategies or methods people interested in those business licenses might be able to use to try to break into the adult use industry. But before that, we're going to break down what is hopefully going to be a new kind of segment, and I'll let Nick talk about it a little bit, just a breakdown of this week's news.
So we usually do this every week on Cannabis Live, but we kind of wanted to put a little bit more of a structured format together where we talk about the news from the local, national, and maybe even international levels. So kind of to go over the local first, there was a product recall, the 7th of the year, that was issued on the 6th of this month. Kind of wanted to just talk about that in terms of, I know I'm seeing on the news headlines a lot of, oh, another one is issued. It's the 7th one this year already. Right. And I think necessarily, you know, that's something that, of course, we should be concerned about for the health and safety. But as far as keeping track and keeping count, I don't know that that's fair really to be making a statement on. These are going to continue to happen. They shouldn't be anything out of the ordinary, and they're going to continue to happen. So,
right. And we're onboarding this for the first time. Laura's doing its job. Its job is to make sure the products entering the market are safe and tested, and we'll see them kind of develop a practice at the same time as the license holders will, you know, work the kinks out and get their products to market.
So there's that one, just kind of, you know, being fair to the licensed facilities that are up and running now, as well as Laura, not categorizing these bulletins and these recalls as completely devastating or anything by any means. It's just part and parcel of the whole system and the learning curve that goes along with licensed facilities. So that's something to keep in mind. There was also I think 7 advisory bulletins that were kind of revised in a certain way, shape, or form by Laura through a technical bulletin about banned chemical active ingredients, sampling and testing, retesting and remediation. That's something that can definitely, you know, needs to be on your radars if you're an operator or if you're planning on applying, just to make sure to keep up to date to the most recent rules and regulations. And then I think just as far as to wrap up the local portion of this, the news out of Ann Arbor is that they are going to be starting a social use ballot initiative in 2020.
One of the first ballot initiatives we've heard about so far in the adult use program, certainly not to be the last, but it's definitely exciting. We'll certainly be watching. I happen to be a resident of Ann Arbor. It's very exciting news to me. So certainly something we encourage other cities to try, and we'll see how successful they end up being.
Yeah, and not only is it available for adult use, it is specifically in that law, but for the MMFLA, for any other kind of ordinance that you might want to get on the ballot or ordinance that you might want to repeal that your elected officials have put into place, the Constitution, the election law, they all provide, as well as city ordinances, they provide for the ballot initiative. And so as we continue to see the question of whether to opt in or opt out comes into factor, things such as ballot initiatives like this are going to be coming more and more frequent and discussed about. So definitely something we'll continue to keep track of. Kind of to move on to the national perspective, the Federal House is going to start picking up the first kind of round of cannabis bills starting on the 13th. The Safe Banking Act would allow banks and credit unions to work freely unless kind of under scrutiny with licensed state-compliant cannabis businesses. So with this new favorable House, and hopefully there's be some movement there, definitely banking's one step, 280E, and then outright federal legalization. So that's another thing that we're going to continue to keep monitoring and watching for all of you. And then just to kind of wrap up this news cap at the international level, a little bit more interesting news. The World Health Organization recommended to reclassify cannabis kind of from an international treaty perspective. Basically what this means now is that the United Nations is going to have to vote whether or not they accept that recommendation to kind of move it from a very, you know, the most restrictive schedule to a least restrictive one. And also take out extracts of cannabis, which includes CBD, which definitely has a lot of impact from the whole international perspective.
And it's definitely going to put the UN in a position to make a determination now with a factual pattern that supports the continuing legalization of marijuana. So it's certainly promising. It might not result in anything anytime soon, but that conversation moving in that direction is definitely great from the overall movement of cannabis throughout the United States and the world.
And I think so, just the fact that they're talking about it and just the fact that a recommendation has been made favorably in this direction, just kind of, the dominoes are going to start toppling. Eventually, those first few have fallen, but it's just a matter of when the rest of them are going to all fall into place.
And the UN movement is, it's important to understand because like a country like Canada, a country like the United States, it's easier for those countries to make decisions and kind of not really care too much about what the UN's position is. But smaller countries, developing countries, countries with significantly reduced size or wealth, they rely on the UN a lot more than Class 1 countries do. So the ability to push a cannabis improvement type of legislation or law through some of those countries would be very much held up by UN stance on the cannabis issue. So just seeing that movement start developing is going to be very promising for the rest of the countries throughout the world. It's exciting to watch.
So that's all I got. Travis, you want to kind of get us into the main topic and we can start talking about micro businesses and Class A growers?
Certainly. So as our faithful viewers are certainly aware, we have talked about micro businesses several times. News articles keep being posted about micro businesses, and it is an exciting license type. But as we've all said several times, until we get rules and regulations defining what the procedures are going to be to establish a microbusiness, until municipalities and cities start allowing them to exist, and until we start seeing what the application is going to be from a cost and time perspective, all we can really do is speculate. So what Nick and I wanted to do today is talk about microbusinesses from a slightly different perspective. It is the license type held out for the little guy, held out for the small business or the individual trying to break into the adult use industry. It gets a lot of attention. What doesn't get a lot of attention is the other license equally held out for small developing businesses, the Class A grow license. So we wanted to really focus on the adult use Class A grow license, compare it to the micro business, compare it to the medical marijuana licenses of its equivalency, and then talk about what license type might be better for you if you are interested in jumping 2 feet deep into the adult use industry. So to start, let's just remind everyone what these licenses are. Nick, what is a microbusiness?
So yeah, a microbusiness is one of the new license types available under Proposition 1, the MRTMA. It allows a licensed facility to grow 150 plants, process it if they so choose to out of that facility, and then also sell it as a retail storefront to adults over 21 years and older.
So that's the microbusiness. And then the other license type we're going to focus on is a Class A grow. What is an adult use Class A grow?
Yeah, and so there's the distinction between the Class A grower under adult use and under medical. The Class A grow for adult use is 100 plants. The Class A grow for the MMFLA medical license facilities is 500 plants. So while it gets a little confusing, we're going to be switching from A to A in different things. But
unfortunately, there's an A, B, and C in both the adult use program and the medical marijuana program. Both are different, but they are referring to sizes of plant counts. So both the micro business and the Class A grow license in the adult use system are held out for Michigan residents. They are small in scale, small in scope, but they are very much designed for a small business to get its start in the cannabis industry. And while a micro business sounds very promising, it allows you to do everything. Grow your plants, sell your plants, be your own business, closed loop system. When you actually start comparing the realities of operating a business like that to what the business is, you'll quickly see that that business type might be very challenging for some groups to pull off. Now, we don't mean to suggest that the microbusiness isn't a great license type to pursue, but we'd like to kind of compare what it would actually take to open and operate a successful microbusiness to starting out instead as a Class A grow. So a Class A grow allows a business to operate and cultivate 100 plants. Like any other grow facility, you wholesale the products into the adult use system. Like any other grower, you're growing batches of products. They go get tested by a testing lab. It goes to a processor to make distillates, or it goes to a marijuana retailer or dispensary to sell directly to the consumer. The only difference between a Class A grow and a Class B or C grow is the amount of plants you can grow. The other difference for the adult use system is a business has to hold a medical marijuana license as well if it is a Class B or C size grower. So the Class A grow, just like the microbusiness, is held out for Michigan residents only. And it is significantly smaller in scale. The 100 plant count is a Class A. Class B jumps up to 500 plants. Class C jumps up to 2,000 plants.
And I think people, just to stop you there, people might say, what's the big deal, right? I've grown 72 for however so many years. I can grow 100, I can grow 500, I can grow 1,000, I can grow 10,000. What's the big deal? Why can't I just go for 5 Class C grows and have the whole shebang and be fully vertically integrated? And why can't I do that?
Well, no one says you can't, but the amount of investment, the amount of build out, the amount of scale that you have to implement is going to be much different. I have a barbecue set up in my backyard, but I am not the head chef of a barbecue restaurant. Like the economy of scale is certainly larger. And on top of that, and probably most significantly, is caregivers are not operating currently in a regulated industry. Several of them will succeed and see great success in it. But when you take 72 plants and you run them through the requirements that growers would have to run through in order to not only operate a compliant facility, but to make sure that those products don't get listed on the bulletins of the recall for chemical residue and things, it's going to take a lot of effort. And the Class A is, out of all of the adult use license types, is clearly the smallest. It's 100 plants compared to the microbusiness is 150. And you don't have to operate a store on top of it. So when you're actually asking about what is the lowest cost, easiest to enter potential license in the adult use system, it is the Class A. Now, the Class A also does not come with the restrictions that the microbusiness has. There is some restricting language in the adult use. It applies to all license types, but it effectively says no one business can hold more than 5 grow licenses. It also says you can only be a part of and invest in a microbusiness, just one. So when you set up roots, you get your approvals, and you obtain your first license as a microbusiness, that is the only marijuana license you can hold in the adult use program. If you have 2 locations and you want to have 2 microbusinesses, one in Royal Oak, one in Ann Arbor, you have to pick one or the other. The law restricts you to just the one. The law also restricts growing to 5. But it doesn't make a distinction between Class A, B, or C license types. So if you set up shop as a Class A grow somewhere and you see success and you're ready to expand, you could, if you wanted to, have a second Class A grow for 200 plants, have a third Class A grow for 300 plants, and maybe you get to the point where you're ready to jump into the Class B grow and have 500 plants. So just as a grower, you have an ability to expand that business if you see success. You could be a Class A grow year one and have 17 Class C or 5 Class C grows. Sorry, I forgot my limit already. So the grower license, especially the Class A grow, gives you the ability to size up that business. And
I think too, when you do that, you could maybe jump in head first in the deep end and say, I'm going to do this retail or grow, process, retail, and it'll be fine. But just because you're there doesn't mean they will come. Your product, there hasn't been proof of concept. Mm-hmm. Maybe your marijuana is less desirable than everybody else's around you. So you might be taking a risk with an unknown brand, an unknown product, an unknown location. With kind of our strategy that we might be proposing now, you start off with 100, you get proof of concept out, you get your strains, you get your names, you get your products out. Mm-hmm. Maybe you scale up to 200, maybe you scale up to 300. And then you decide, okay, well, what am I bringing in? What am I making off of that? Would that be able to be transferable to having a storefront and processing it? What would the differences look there? And so I think that carries a little bit less risk to it. It kind of relaxes the learning curve a little bit. And Travis and I talked about this a little bit earlier. It would be like, I run. I would probably be the best at doing a marathon with less training, but I would still, because I've done it on and off, it becomes more natural to me. But that doesn't mean if I was able to sign up for a marathon that involved biking and swimming,
triathlon,
that would be triathlon.
I knew what you were going for.
Yeah. So if I tried to sign up for that, I would not really swim and bike very far, even though I'd be good at running. So just because that's available, maybe I just sign up for a marathon first and then expand into those other activities later on.
It allows you to specialize. If you start with 100 plants and you figure out that you can successfully cultivate in a highly regulated industry, you remember you are renewing any license you hold every year. So get into year one, you only have to focus on growing. You wholesale any products you sell to the market. Maybe your products are high quality and they build brand awareness, maybe they're low quality, but a low quality product can be wholesaled to processors, can be sold to provisioning centers that don't have to rely on that product alone. The micro business is a closed loop system. You get 150 plants, so 50 plants more than the Class A, and you have to be the point of sale for those plants. You don't get to bring products in to your market. You don't get to take your products out of your market. You have to, from the day you start as a micro business, specialize both in a regulated grow and be able to sell those products as point of sale. And potentially the third option of processing into some sort of edible or distillate or edible product. So being a microbusiness is potentially the best start for some businesses, but do not discount the fact that, especially if you're coming to this from a caregiver, the rules and regulations imparted on any grow, whether you're the microbusiness growing your 150 plants, the Class A, or of any scale, you need to make sure that you're cultivating in a compliant way, that your products get tested and are able to be approved for sale to the end consumer. So if you do start with a Class A grow, you have two options. You could go into a larger grow if you decide cultivation is working for you, or you could consider going from a Class A grow, making sure that cultivation is locked up, and then pursuing the micro business where you take that Class A grow and you become responsible for selling those products, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not for everyone. We are not suggesting you can't be a micro business without being a Class A, but the reason we wanted to talk about it is because I think that when you look at the realities of getting a microbusiness, a couple factors come into play. You need to, just like every other license of any scale, find a location for your business. You need to convince a municipality to allow those businesses to exist. You need to be able to acquire those locations and then seek licensure for them. As we've seen in the medical system, municipalities are pretty hesitant and pretty strict in zoning. So finding a location that is ideal for both cultivating your product and encouraging consumers to come to your location is going to be twice as difficult than if you only have to find a location where you have to specialize in growing. If you were to be a small business that relies completely on someone coming to you to purchase products, you need to be in a location that's accessible to your consumer. Not only have potential 21-year-olds who consume cannabis, in your immediate striking distance, but also have a facility that allows you to grow the plants that you can even sell the products to them in the first place. The micro business does not allow you to have two different locations. You might be able to be on the same parcel with different facilities upon it, but you can't have parcel 1 downtown be your storefront and parcel 2 out in the boonies be your grow area. You have to be a one-unit closed-loop system. You have to grow everything and sell effectively at the same location, which means finding a location ideal for that is going to be challenging for some businesses.
And it definitely already will be for all of the adult use establishments coming up because, aside from the fact that you need a medical license to get most of those adult use licenses anyway, the fact of the matter is that there's only a limited amount of space in a city. The city has already, and township and village have already gone through these types of considerations. Mm-hmm. What zones can fit these land uses? What sensitive uses do we want to keep them away from? So since those are already kind of put into place, you're going to run into a situation where the real estate is very, very, very scarce, even more so than it already has been. And so if there is an industrial park somewhere where there is something more available, that can allow you to maybe have that micro business there or that Class A grow there. And I think we're also, something we might talk about in a little bit, is just how else we can allow these smaller businesses with our laws and regulations to actually survive and to thrive. Mm-hmm. And just kind of forecasting a little bit with that comment is that, if perhaps micro businesses were allowed to deliver necessarily, maybe without even having their storefront open, if they could just grow 150 plants, process, and then deliver it to whatever geographic footprint they wanted to, I think that would be something in the law that would necessarily take the focus off a storefront being right. Really the be-all, end-all of a micro business, because you're not going to want a micro business on Beaver Island. Or maybe you might, that might be a kind of cool thing, but it's not generally populated, it's more of a vacation destination. You want traffic, you want demand, right. And that might not happen, but with delivery, potentially, if you could do that as a micro business, you could expand your reach and not have to pay so much overhead with employees and things like that. So there's definitely a big, questions going forward as far as how this is actually going to play out, but I think the main takeaway that we want to kind of impose on everyone is that we kind of see a big range of people having different business plans, saying something sounds interesting or really wants to go for that. Various different levels of planning happen after that, where, if you want a micro business, have you thought about what we're talking about? Have you thought about things we might not be talking about right now that all affect your bottom line, that all affect your business plan? And it might sound great to want the micro business, but if you really crunch the numbers and think that scaling up with smaller grows that allow you to be more flexible, these are the types of conversations and creative thinking that needs to be done for everybody in this industry, and not just thinking it's a golden ticket.
Right, and let's not discount the fact that a microbusiness, being a point of sale, is competing with the traditional marijuana dispensary, marijuana retailer license that can source products from a variety of sources, that will have a variety of product, and will likely be able to source products of various price points. So if you're competing against a business like that, you have 150 plants, they have the entire state of Michigan. The products are just going to be a difficult space to compete in. Doesn't mean there isn't certain room for that. I mean, the whole point of a microbusiness is to create that equivalent of a craft brewer type feel. And just like grocery stores can survive and thrive next to farmers markets, there are conceptually great space for the microbusiness to be, but that doesn't mean you just assume it's going to work. You need to put the work in to determine how your microbusiness's business plan makes sense for the strategy you're implementing. On top of that, Nick mentioned something like, how is a microbusiness going to be able to compete? Delivery would be great. We don't have rules and regs to really define for us what delivery is going to look like in the adult use system. We have, we know in the medical system, medical marijuana provisioning centers are going to be able to engage in delivery. But from a microbusiness's perspective, that has overlap with your potential consumer as well. Not only will you be competing against the other more robust traditional dispensaries in the adult use system, but you'll also be competing against the deliveries or potentially just storefronts of the medical marijuana dispensary. And until we have a grasp of what delivery will look like in the adult use system, we have no guarantee that the adult use stores of any size, microbusiness or otherwise, are going to have delivery available to them. The way the Prop 1, RTMA is drafted, delivery could very much be a license type that would be contemplated after the system's put in place. Separate licensing.
Yeah, and I was just thinking too, as you're talking about all the different types of licensees that a microbusiness might have to compete with, how about the black market? I mean, you're growing 150 plants, somebody next door that either got denied entry to the regulated market or never wanted to enter it at all could be growing somewhat similar within their limits and selling it and undercutting you, and then nobody comes into your store even though you're the only microbusiness in town. So, I think it's really important to also be cognizant of the other factors besides just the licensed facilities as a potential microbusiness owner or even a grower that is doing it the legitimate way, to think about, you're going to be competing whether you like to acknowledge it or not. The black market's not going to go anywhere, and it's not going to go anywhere for a while. So that's another thing to work into your business.
Right, and we've been talking about what maybe a potential microbusiness business owner should be considering. Let's shift gears and put ourselves in the perspective of a municipality. A municipality should very much be aware of the fact that if they want to take advantage of the excise fund created by the medical marijuana program in the adult use industry, they get a prorated share of the pot based on the number of dispensaries and microbusinesses available in their community. If you have 10 dispensaries and 10 microbusinesses, you get 20 shares of the pot. If you have one dispensary, no microbusinesses, you get 1 share of the pot. All of the excise tax contemplated by the medical marijuana program was based on the total number of licenses. It did not distinguish between grows, processors, transporters, labs, dispensaries. In adult use, when that law went into effect, the excise tax for the medical program turned off. There is no longer an excise tax pool under the MMFLA. There is going to be a pool under the RTMA.
Hopefully that's not a surprise for everyone.
Right. So what that means is if I'm a municipality, I'm counting on wanting to take advantage of the adult use program from a funding perspective, then the way that works is the more businesses I allow in my municipality, the bigger share of that potential pot that my community will get. That doesn't mean that's the only factor encouraging municipalities to support these businesses, but that is a factor. And encouraging several micro businesses as opposed to 1 or 2 large dispensaries gives you the same share for each micro business you allow. But when you choose to, as a municipality, contemplate allowing micro businesses, you need those businesses to succeed. As Nick's mentioned, you can't turn off the black market. what the laws under both the MMFLA and the RTMA allow a municipality to do is prohibit the legal market. The black market does what it wants. So if you as a municipality say, we don't want dispensaries in our town, that's fine, but black market marijuana is still coming into your town, or the constituents of your municipality are just going to go get it from the legal sources available in other communities. So we need municipalities to think about a few things. Marijuana delivery is legal whether your community chooses to allow it or not. Consumers of marijuana, both medically and adult use, is legal whether your community decides to allow businesses or not. And if you don't allow storefronts in the adult use program, the municipalities that do are going to get that share of the revenue raised by the excise tax.
And it's not just about fear of missing out. And, with a grain of salt, the excise tax will be a portion of the piece of the pie that's divided amongst everyone. So I don't think any of the advocates for Prop 1 really said, everyone's going to be getting a huge windfall from this tax. That's not the point. I think the point is to bring things out of the black and the gray market, to invigorate job creation and development, to acknowledge what we've been doing before was the wrong decision. And so it's a kind of a big melting pot of different reasons why things should be opted into rather than opted out, but it's not just solely about the tax revenue. So there's a lot more considerations there. But as Travis mentioned, he's exactly right. The decision to not opt into the MMFLA or the RTMA is essentially, at least for the short term, opting in almost to the black market and opting out of having jobs in your city and infrastructure rebuilt and property values going up. So,
and related to that is creating a set of rules and ordinances at your local level that are so burdensome that it makes it practically impossible for smaller businesses to thrive, is only encouraging the large companies to come in and monopolize that market. So if you as a municipality, and this doesn't really apply to medical or adult use specifically, just create a system that doesn't allow the businesses in your community to be the ones holding those licenses, you're going to have those out of area companies coming in. That's not a bad thing if you just want access to marijuana, you're just happy to have it. But if you want to help your community grow and do so with the people interested in entering this market from your community, then you should really be considering how to allow these businesses to thrive. Being a microbusiness, I think the conclusion here we just want to emphasize, is not going to be an easy business to run. You have to, day one, be really good at growing and selling marijuana. And if one struggles, the other isn't going to save you. You can grow the best marijuana in the world. If you're terrible at selling it, you're going to have a problem. You can have the most unique storefront possible, but if your product sucks, you're going to have a problem selling it. So when you want to be a microbusiness, that's great, but that is probably the equivalent, scaled down, of having two completely separate licenses at the larger scale markets. So, and we just want to touch on, since we have a few more minutes, the other type of business model to consider when you're thinking about breaking into the adult use market. And not to be confusing, it is also a Class A grower's license. The Class A grower license in the medical program allows a business to cultivate up to 500 plants. And compared to the other licenses in the system, it's still an expensive license to pursue. It's probably going to be several $100,000 start to finish to get that company licensed. But relative to the other grow licenses, relative to the processor, provisioning center, secure transporter, safety compliance facility, onboarding, overall expense cost, it is by far the lowest barrier to entry for the medical marijuana market. And the only reason I want to mention that as a path into the adult use market is because if you're not going for the 100 plant class A grow and adult use, if you're not going for the micro business, all other licenses in adult use require a company to hold one of the medical marijuana licenses for the first 2 years of the program. So holding a Class A medical marijuana grow license is, in most cases, there's going to be exceptions to this, but in most cases, the lowest expense your company can take to open the door to any of those other adult use licenses for you. So when you're thinking about, as the title of the show is, how to break into the adult use market, from a cost perspective, the three, at least conceptually, lowest barriers to enter from a financial perspective are the microbusiness, the Class A grow and adult use, and the Class A grow and medical. And each have their strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for growth. So I think that's probably enough of us gushing about the adult use licenses. Obviously, everyone is very excited about them until we see rules and regulations come out. We don't have much more than what the statute says, but we wanted to take the conversation about what a microbusiness is in a different direction. We're recognizing the Class A grow license in the adult use program, the 100 plant count. It's obviously not as exciting, but in my professional opinion, and I think I'm trying to convince all my peers about it, it's probably the most logical step for a little group or the small guy or the small business that really wants to do this, but financially is going to be challenging to do it. It's got to be conceptually the cheapest way to get into this market. So don't rule it out. It's not for everybody. Microbusinesses could be a great start for you, and maybe one of the larger types could as well. But it's certainly something that should be just as exciting to you as the other license types available.
And I was just thinking to close off something you had said a little bit earlier was if those municipalities do put up too big of hurdles for these smaller businesses, at least thankfully with Prop 1, the MRTMA, there's language in there saying a municipality can't impose ordinance restrictions that are too unreasonably impracticable. And that's not defined, but not necessarily by category, but it's defined as something that an ordinary business person wouldn't decide to enter into. And so,
Right.
Whether that's an ordinary business person of a small business, medium business, large business, it's to be seen. But at least compared to the MMFLA, there's no mechanism to potentially challenge something that a municipality might put in front of you and make you comply with. But with adult use, that's at least, if they challenge a micro business's ability and make it unreasonably impractical, at least that's some way that the little guy can kind of fight back. And
Right. Or you can follow my home city of Ann Arbor's lead and start thinking about a potential ballot initiative if municipalities, start putting programs in place that don't make sense for their constituency.
Absolutely.
So, well, I think that's enough of us gushing about. We'll be here next week. So for Travis Copenhaver,
Nicholas Galendez,
thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
have a good weekend.